Well, before we get into the questions that I wanted to talk about, I wanted to spitball a couple quick things with you guys. All right. First, I want to emphasize something that I do in my classroom that I wanted to share with you guys that works really well for me. Right. Which is I try to structure my classrooms with threads that weave across the entire expanse of Texas history. Right. So I don't know if you guys experience them this way, but when I read the TEKS, every unit kind of feels like its own grab bag of names and places and events, right? And that's fun, and they're all very interesting. But my students get confused by the huge number of people or groups that come parading around when we go through these different sections of Texas history. What I find is helpful for them is to create threads that are constant throughout the units, right? That stretch through the entirety of Texas history, because then they can see how things connect on this one idea along multiple time periods. And it makes it easier for them to see how things not only connect with each other, but therefore why they matter, right? Does that make sense? So one of the themes I was thinking about that I use in my classroom that I think would work pretty well across the presentations that we've been seeing over the course of the fall, and you've heard me actually use this mantra, I think, in this class before now, is that geography matters, right? And so when I do Texas history at UNT, I tell them, like, literally the first thing I tell them in class is say, all right, take out your notebooks. Some of them are typing, but whatever. And write down this phrase: geography matters, right? And then as we go through things, I constantly come back to that mantra of geography matters, because it's a way of linking ideas across time and space, right? So when we talk about geography, you guys start in the TEKS talking about Texas geography. Am I correct about that? That's a major organizing sort of theme, right? You guys set that up anyway, right? And then in the first presentation that we had with Dr. Smith, one of the things he was talking about is the geography of Texas affecting where all these Native American groups went to, right? So I was explaining to my students, like, the Caddos are in East Texas, and they have better resources to build stronger situation for themselves than the Coeotecans do in the valley, right? Because they have a different geography and they have different resources as a result of that. So, and then I do geography matters and they roll their eyes at me, but then I keep it going, right? We talked about with Dr. Barr about maps and how the Spaniards saw this region versus how the native group saw this region. Geography matters. When we talk about the Tejanos and their experience in the region, the Anglo-Americans, when they come into the region, they're using it in different ways, and that's all tied again to geography, right? So you see those perspectives over time, and it really links things together. Another mantra that I use in my classrooms is that perspectives matter, right? And I think that's something else that we've seen in all these different presentations, because a lot of the presentations have been from very different perspectives of these time periods, right? We've seen a lot of the Native American groups and their perspectives about these different events, particularly in the earlier periods. We saw how the Spaniards saw the region, how the Tejanos saw the region, how the Anglo-Americans would later see the region. Right? And so one of the things I always emphasize with my students is it matters whose perspective that we're looking at, especially when we're talking about primary sources. And that's another, like, what you call it, orientation, like, thread that they use over the course of the entire thing that I keep coming back to time and time and time again, because it's like this mantra that I keep hitting in terms of questions that I need to emphasize with them so they can connect things over long periods of time. I'll give you one other thing that I use in my classrooms that helps kind of unite sort of these long periods of history, because UNT, when I teach the Texas History Survey, I'm doing literally all of Texas history in one semester, right? So we go from, my joke is from cave people to last week. You guys may have heard me make that joke before, but the hard part about that is maintaining not their focus, but like to see continuities and connections over that long period of time. There's just so much that happens when you go from, prehistoric until, early 21st century. So one of the ways I do that is some of those theme threads that I was describing as well. But the main way I do it is that I take an approach in the classroom where I try to emphasize making them the historians, right? Where I try to emphasize questions that they have to help me answer. Does that make sense? Um, or I try to present these sort of open-ended kind of like, I usually start the whole class by talking about like, how is it that, and then I'll fill in all these different periods in Texas history that these changes happen and present it as this ongoing debate and discussion. The way I usually do that is with primary sources, where I have, every section of our class, they're trying to answer some question using primary sources. And I turn them loose usually on newspapers on the Portal of Texas History. But I'm going to share my screen here and show you guys some examples of that I think, at least I hope, will be useful for you guys bringing some of that stuff in. All right. So, all right. I don't know if anybody's ever encountered the History Labs project at the University of Maryland Center for History Education. I'm going to have a PowerPoint that's going to have this link in it, so you'll be able to find that as well. But the basic idea of these history labs is it's problem-based learning, right? The idea is to present the students a problem or a question in history, and sort of an open-ended kind of, why did Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence if he was a slaveholder? And let that one percolate for them, that they have to answer, and that they have to come at finding the answer to the question, right? And what I love about this, and I do this at the college level, this project, History Labs, is built for K through 12, right? It's built around introducing that kind of approach in his social studies classrooms across the country. But what I love about it, and what I work on so much, is doing this at the college level, where I ask them to, here's a question: why did the South secede? Why did Texas join the Confederacy? And then I turn them loose in historical records, and it works really well because I do it over and over again over the course of the semester. So they learn the critical thinking skills and thinking like a historian that they need in real world sort of situations. That's why it's, I love the PBL approach, because it doesn't start with answers, it starts with questions, and that leaves the wonder and excitement, I think, in historical investigation. So methodologically, they get to experience that over and over and over again over the course of the semester. And so I wanted to point you guys towards the History Labs as this project that's really built around supporting teachers who are interested in taking primary sources, like what you guys have gotten from all the different presentations over the course of the fall here, and then taking them into the classroom to, not just present our students as one more thing to consume and experience, but to allow them to answer a question, right? And some of our presenters have had in their presentations essential or guiding questions that they've been presenting, and the primary sources, be a way of getting into those sorts of questions. History Lab is built around that same sort of basic idea, right? And so I'm sure a lot of you have, worked on, problem-based learning, or even more sophisticated project-based learning. But the website, I highly recommend it. Walks through every different aspect of developing, these big level questions, building the background knowledge with our students. They've got a great set of resources, and it's really well put together, that I've gone through quite a bit because I found it inspirational for another project that I'm working on, and walking through all those different steps. So I highly recommend it. They also have on the site pre-built labs, right? Essentially lesson plans built around this idea structurally of opening these kinds of questions. Now, this is done again at the University of Maryland, so none of these are Texas related questions per se. But you get the basic, you go through here, you can get sort of the basic idea of how they lay all this stuff out. And they've got a really beautiful template for how these things are put together. And they have an open-ended version of the template too, where you can go through that are aligned to the Common Core. It gives you a sense of like how you would build one of these things and walk through it. for me, I use a very similar approach in my classrooms built around primary sources. So one opportunity here again would be to take a lot of the primary sources that we've used over the course of the fall semester and to be able to grab them and then use them in the classroom with the students in this sort of open-ended, accessible kind of way, right? I'm going to share a different set of documents right here. Let's see here. Okay, so one more thing I want to share with you is, let's see, boom, boom. All right, and I'll share this PowerPoint with you guys after today. You've seen, oh, some of this has been up on the Google Classroom already for the class, but here's a list of some primary places you can get some great primary sources for teaching Texas history, a lot of which you guys probably know, some of which you may not have seen, but I highly recommend, right? The biggest one is the Portal of Texas History, which is just insane how much material is on there. They recently digitized, I believe, their 8 millionth newspaper page. Like just the newspaper collection alone is incredible. It goes all the way back to the 18 teens, and it's 8 million pages of historical newspapers. You can find an enormous amount of stuff there. The Texas Archive of the Moving Image is also really good. It's very robust with teacher-oriented resources, and they've got a lot of great material there. Primary source material that's visual, so it's really exciting for students. The Library of Congress's digital collections are incredible. And if you haven't had a chance to see those, I highly recommend them because first off, they're free. And second, prominent figures like Sam Houston, who you guys can use in 7th grade, and then 8th grade US history teachers will also be able to use and spiral content around people like Sam Houston very easily between 7th and 8th grade. We've got some great materials right there. Not a lot of people know about the SMU Library's digital collection. Their material is not in the Portal of Texas History, but they've got a great little, wonderful little collection that they've been curating for some time. That's really amazing. Texas State Archive stuff is also very good, as is the Houston area digital archives. These are a couple resources, and I won't go through all of them because they are what they are, but where there's pre-created lesson plans for anybody who's interested in finding some of this material. The ones I recommend the most are Resources for Educators, which is on the Portal of Texas History, and Teaching Texas, which is an older project. I don't think it's been updated very much, but it used to aggregate teaching resources from lots of different places. And so I highly recommend all that. Other resources I recommend, again, History Labs. So this has the URL in it. I'm going to share this PowerPoint with you guys so that you'll be able to go there and take a look at their resources and how they structure creating these individual history labs and taking those primary sources into the classroom in a problem-based approach that I think is extremely effective pedagogically. I'd also just recommend museumed.org. Which is built around, media literacy basically, and putting historical events into context in a way that students become hopefully better literate at being able to contextualize information over time and space. It's really well done. They've got some really great lessons and resources of various sorts. Another project I would point you guys toward is tolerance.org, which it's called Teaching Tolerance, but it's got free lessons and resources for K through 12 educators. They're often about teaching very tough topics. And that's another theme, I think, in the materials that we've been working our way through in Texas history, is how do we deal with tough issues like slavery and the road to the Texas Revolution. In some case, we talked a lot about slavery in a lot of the different presentations about Tejano perspectives, Anglo perspectives. We didn't get a chance to talk much about obviously African American experiences and perspectives on that. But these are difficult topics, and one of the great things about teaching tolerance is that it's built around trying to find useful ways of engaging these topics with students, with pre-done lesson plans and support materials. There's a lot of really useful material on the site that I highly recommend. Um, and then the last resource I wanted to point you guys toward is the Library of Congress's primary source analysis guides. They've got some really wonderful resources on analyzing primary sources, analyzing different types of materials. And again, all across, our fall series, you guys have been seeing and working with these different primary sources, which are all kinds of things. Some are firsthand accounts, some are newspaper accounts, some are images, some are maps, right? There's a lot of different kinds of these materials, and teaching our students how to read these things and talk about them and try to understand them, can be challenging. And the Library of Congress analysis guides are really fantastic tools for helping spark and prompt, useful historical discussions and contexts around all of these different documents. So you might have been aware of some of these, probably weren't aware of all of them, but I wanted to make you guys aware and just point you guys toward them, because again, at the end of the day, right, our goal is to take all this wonderful material that we've been getting from all these different professors over the course of the fall, and then implement that stuff, like make it actionable by taking it into our classroom and using them in those kinds of ways. All right. So let me pause right here and see if do you guys have any, before we dive into our discussion portion of everything, do you guys have any questions?